was Yemeni musicians, traditional Yemeni oud jam session. And if you were listening to our competitors with NPR this morning, you heard Scott Simon talking to Senator Chris Murphy from Connecticut, who is one of the few who has his awareness of what we're doing in Yemen. And I'm going to throw it to my compadre, Thom Clark, to start the interview with our good friend, Kathy Kelly. Welcome back. Welcome back to Chicago.
Thank you, Katy.
Good to have you, Kathy.
And you've had a
Thank
busy
you,
week
Mike.
in Chicago,
Thank you,
Kathy. Why were you hauling 44 backpacks in the Federal Plaza?
You know, there was a cartoon that appeared after the Saudis attacked a school bus filled with children. And the cartoon showed blue backpacks that looked somewhat like tombstones in front of graves. And I thought, you know, we could set that up in the Federal Building Plaza. And it, you know, it wasn't all that hard to pull together. We ordered 44 blue children's backpacks, and then a friend helped us with placards that described what had happened on August 9th. The children were just on an outing, and their teacher had stopped to pick up picnic supplies. And suddenly a 500-pound missile manufactured by Lockheed Martin, sold to the Saudis, ripped through that bus, and suddenly 44 children were dead. And then there were survivors. 11 other adults were killed, 76 people were wounded. But imagine the trauma of the child who survived and was burned and maimed and bloodied. And some were dazed, some were already screaming in pain. The emergency room tried to treat and help those surviving children. But the Saudis not only did not express remorse, they actually said, we don't want Yemenis ever to forget what we can do. And so on the 23rd of August, a bus was evacuating children near the port of Hodeidah so that they could get out of harm's way, and that bus was hit. So,
And these are the people we are allied with.
Very much so. You know, one way to see it is almost like a drive-by. A journalist named Samuel Oakford put this together. He said, it's as though the United States gives the ammunition for the drive-by shooter, the targeting directions, and the fuel, and the vehicle. And that's really true. We supply the Saudis with their weapons, with their warplanes, with surveillance, with targeting advice. And now it turns out Saudi pilots are going to be training here in the United States. Well, those of us who go back to September 11th remember that of the hijackers that hijacked the passenger plane that flew into the Twin Towers, 15 were from Saudi Arabia. Right. And of them, several had studied flight training in the United States, and now we're bringing Saudi pilots over to the United States to study how to fly planes again.
This is appalling. This is appalling.
And, you know, the United Nations is alarmed and warning that 18 million Yemeni people could die by the end of this year. We are attacking a country which is the poorest country on the Arab Peninsula, and because of the previous attacks, when they first attacked a sewage and sanitation facility, and then the adjacent electrical facility, well, this meant you can't
live.
Yeah, because the water is poisoned, and so they now have 1 million people identified with cholera, and the UN is expecting a third wave of cholera. People suffer so much in that country, and across it's called the Bab el-Mandab. It's a very tiny waterway that separates the Horn of Africa from Yemen. In Somalia, Eritrea, Ethiopia, South Sudan, parts of Kenya, drought hit the people so badly, and that drought is in part caused by northern industrial greenhouse gases. So we're not so innocent in that regard. But the drought that is going across, they call it the SEMA, the Great Leveler. It's causing displacement. Desperate people think, well, where can we go? You know, their livestock have thirsted to death. Their crops are failing. They can't feed their children. So they go toward the strait where they think maybe they could cross into the Saudi peninsula. So they cross into Yemen. And there's Yemen with the The U.S.-supported Saudi-led coalition airstrikes are hitting Yemen on an average of 3 times a day.
So every time you eat, fellow Americans, every time you eat, think about who we are party to killing. Have you just come back? Were you in Yemen?
We sure tried. The Saudis are not letting anybody into Yemen. Only one flight can go in a day to the airport, which is otherwise closed down in Sana'a. And if you don't have a UN badge or a proof that you work for an NGO that's been in Yemen for like a decade or so, there's no way you can get on that plane. So there's a real limitation to any kind of reporting about human rights in Yemen. But Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch and AP and a recent PBS report and CNN coverage have started to break that kind of blockade of news. We could tell because down in the Federal Building Plaza, people would walk past these 44 blue backpacks and stop and pause, and then they say, oh yeah, I heard about that. So that's good that there's some CNN coverage, and the senior reporter, CNN correspondent Nina al-Bakri, she has directly stated that the United States is responsible and accountable for the crimes that are happening in Yemen today. She was so distressed after the bombing of the children's school bus.
Do we have any senators other than Chris Murphy who are sounding the call?
Well, here in Illinois, Senator Durbin did write a letter to, his name is Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia, and he said, look, you know, you should do more to assure that civilians aren't being targeted by your war. But I think that when President Trump and the Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, went over to Saudi Arabia, separate trips, you know, they dance with the princes, they shake hands, they make assurances. Yes, what we really, really want are your continued purchases of our Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Raytheon, and General Dynamics products. Do you know Lockheed Martin on World Photo Day actually encouraged people to send in pictures of their favorite Lockheed Martin product. So many, many people sent in pictures of the bloodied blue backpacks.
Oh my God.
And they said this is a direct product and a direct result of Lockheed Martin's developments and sales. And so Lockheed Martin quickly withdrew the invitation to
That's
send
good.
in pictures of what you like
my
that Lockheed
God.
Martin has made lately.
Kathy Kelly, can you give us a little background on Yemen? You know, I'm not sure how you pronounce it, it's Houthis rebels. They control part of the
Houthis.
country. There's obviously there's religious stuff with Shiites, and there's alignment with Iran. Fill us in a little bit about the politics of Yemen and how it came to be as a country.
Thanks, Michael. So Yemen was under a dictatorship for 33 years. The dictator, Ali Abdullah Saleh, was running that country in a way that stole the wealth from people. And he and his cronies did quite well, while people were increasingly facing the alarms of a lowering water table, cutbacks on fuel subsidies, people moving into the cities, and there was no way to accommodate the rising populations. And during the Arab Spring in particular, there were young people who made links with shepherds and ranchers. And they said, you know, this isn't working for any of us. And they started to have large demonstrations in Sana'a, that capital city that I mentioned. They turned the major square into Change Square, and they said, we want change. And the kind of arts academic community in a city called Taiz were also very, very active. And they did things which were so impressive. You know, Yemeni women are not very often seen as political figures, but they did what they could. They wore their long black abayas, but on their heads they wore red, white, and black baseball caps, so that from above, as the women marched, you could see that they were campaigning for a better Yemen. And the students had organized all kinds of graffiti and music and artwork and poetry. And at one point, while people were demonstrating in Sana'a, men went up on the rooftops, they were out of uniform, they had rifles, and they shot down and killed 50 people. But the organizers, knowing they wouldn't have any arm strength to respond, held a discipline and organized a walk from from Taiza to Sana'a. And then when their colleagues were in prison, they organized a fast outside the prison. They tried everything. They begged the ranchers and the shepherds, leave your guns home. We're going to keep this unarmed discipline. And finally, the Houthi rebels said, well, we're going to do what we can to actually rebel carrying arms. And they marched on Sana'a, the capital, and they took it over. Now, sorry, I got ahead of myself. The Gulf Corporation, the Gulf states have a cooperative council. They met with the dictator and they said, look, how about you step aside? It's been 33 years. We'll let you appoint your successor. So he agreed to that. And Ali Abdullah Saleh appointed a fellow named Abdurabu Mansur Hadi. Now this was the deputy vice minister. I mean, it wasn't a very big switch. And Saleh stepped
Putting pence
aside.
in there.
Well, yeah, that's the kind of a deal that it was, I think. So the new guy goes in, nothing changes, and that's when people said, up with this, we will not put. And the Houthi rebels marched on the capital city of Sana'a, and they took over much of northern Yemen. Well,
With guns.
yes, and Saleh, the dictator, the former dictator, decided, I'm going to make common cause with the Houthi rebels, and the Saudis, the neighbor one state north, said, well, for goodness sakes, we can just go in on this and, more or less take it over. So they started in with airstrikes on behalf of Abdurabu Mansur Hadi, who took up residence in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, because he had no way to really run the country. There's almost no governance. The central bank has been closed down. People haven't been paid salaries. When the United States, under President Obama, sold 4 combat, they're called them littoral ships, these huge ships to the Saudis blockaded the main port through which all of the vital needs for food and water and medicine are met. They shut it down. It's a state of siege. And now they will open it up with just a trickle of incoming goods. It's a horrific situation. It's a conflict-driven famine. And the United States has been participant.
Kathy, when were you last in Afghanistan? How's your street youth project going there?
Oh, thank you for asking about that. I came back in June of this year, and I was so happy to see that the Afghan Peace Volunteers have made common cause with a group that walked from the Helmand province to Kabul. It was a 400-mile walk, and they did it during the month of Ramadan, and that's a brutally difficult month in which to be walking because people don't take a drop of water or any food during Ramadan until the sun goes down. But they, as they made their way through various provinces of people from different religious, ethnic backgrounds, these were mainly Sunni people who then were walking through the province of Ghazni, which is mainly Hazara. People met with them, cheered them on, thanked them, sang the anthem for Afghanistan with them. And they got to Kabul safely, which was a big relief. And now they're walking toward Mazar-e-Sharif in the north of Afghanistan. And what they're saying is negotiate. Stop thinking that we can solve our problems through continued bombing. I had a chance to talk with one young person from the Wardak province who lives next door to where I stay when I'm there. And I said, how is your family? He said, the bombings are so intense that they've run out of places to bury the dead.
Oh, God.
So Afghanistan is in great need of reparations from the United States, but not of United States bombs, not of United States military bases.
Kathy, you just gave us just this most horrific history of what has been going on in Yemen and our part in it. And our part, again, you shared with us on many times before in Afghanistan and other places. Where do you get the faith to carry on your struggle to turn weapons into plowshares, which you've been doing for all the years I've known of you? And where do you get that faith?
Rubbing shoulders with some of the finest people in the world helps a lot. Being with young people in different parts of the world who truly believe in united resistance to a permanent warfare state. That helps a lot. And I think it'll catch on here. I think we're going to see a generation of high school and university students who are going to understand that you can't have a rational discussion about solving the problems we face, and these problems aren't going away. Climate change, police brutality, mass incarceration, what happens because of detentions of immigrants, all of these problems must be addressed, but you can't rationally talk about solving them and still accommodate a permanent warfare state. Because that's the gorilla sitting in the room. As long as the permanent warfare state is like a demonic suction cup, a vacuum, taking all the resources, there's nothing left with which to solve the problems. Now, I don't think that 10, 15 years ago, within academia, you would have heard much discussion about featuring and centering racism as a means of analyzing what goes on in our world. But a generation has learned to adapt a new language, and this is important. It's very, very important. And now we have to keep going. We have to ask the next question like good journalists do. And the next question is, how do we cope with the problems we now face? How do we forge unity and not keep dividing and dividing and dividing? And that unity, I think, can come when people listen to young people all around the world who are saying, we are sick to death of war. Stop your war-making menace. Stop aiming your guns at us. Stop spending so much money on your weapons that the only way you can perpetuate your system is to sell your weapons to us. Stop it. And I think as young people start to say that elsewhere in a world that's increasingly knit together, young people here are going to respond, and I look forward to that.
Kathy, you've been in hot spots all over the world, but you also paid a lot of attention to domestic activities to try to interrupt the war machine. There's an upcoming trial or sentencing for plowshares folks that you've been focused on in particular. Can you fill us in on what's happening with the plowshares movement, which has been going on since the 70s?
Sure.
In
This
one
was,
form or
there have been over 100 plowshares actions. This is the idea of turn swords into plowshares. Turn your spears into pruning hooks. Feed people. And the latest plowshares activists have started to use a word I'm not so familiar with, omnicide. That the nuclear weaponry we now possess, either by mistake, miscalculation, or deliberate use, could create omnicide. There's no such thing as a small tactical nuclear exchange that wouldn't occasion a nuclear winter and the failure of crops and the resultant deaths of millions of people. But, a small exchange is not what the United States is prepared for. I once upon a time planted corn on top of an intercontinental ballistic missile, and I don't know why I'm not out doing it every morning of my life. It would be a good way to start the day. But I got a year in prison for that. These friends who are from the Catholic worker community went down to Kings Bay, Georgia, and went into a home port for the Trident nuclear weapons fleet. Poured their own blood on top of a symbol that celebrates it, and they took just a hammer to a monument that celebrates the Trident fleet. And their idea is to symbolically do some damage. They used crime scene tape, and they had very, very good banners about omnicide. They're likely to be sentenced, if they are found guilty, to anywhere from 5 to 10 years in prison. And they range in age from 55 years of age to 78 years of age. 7 people, fine and wonderful people. So I think my job is to help people fall in love with them.
Yes.
So we're going to walk from Savannah to Kings Bay from September 4th to the 14th.
Your job right now is to tell people, how do they get this information other than on Live from the Heartland? In this information age, this is stuff that people should know more about. You're filling us with information. We need this to go out.
Well,
Where do they go to
They've
find
got
out?
a great website, Kings Bay Plowshares 7. You spell out Kings, like in checkers, Kings, Bay, B-A-Y, plowshares, 7, because there are 7 of them. And,
Plowshares.
and we're calling our walk the Disarm Trident Savannah to Kings Bay Walk, starting Monday.
Kathy, you mentioned that you had spent a year in jail. I think the last time you were on our show, you had just come out of prison. And I'm wondering, one of the things that doesn't get talked about enough in our country, but we know it is a severe situation, is the incarceration of an awful lot of people. We incarcerate more people, I believe, than anywhere in the world. I wonder if you could give us a little insight into what the prison experience is like, if your time in the joint, so to speak, was in a federal prison, or what the situation was. What do you glean from all that
You can
time
read her
in-
book.
I'm going to read it.
Just like war isn't over when it's over, imprisonment isn't over. It lasts a lifetime, I believe. And the length of sentencing is so onerous. I've been in prison in 1988, and if someone was sentenced to 10 years in prison back in 1988, we would all be, kind of whispering and pointing. Can you believe it? She got 10 years. Well, when I was in prison in 2015, that wasn't unusual at all for people to have 8-year sentences, 10-year sentences. And I remember one woman holding another, and the woman who was weeping was just saying, I can't do it. I can't possibly be here for another 4 years. She had just lost an appeal. And the other women were, it was like putting her together, saying, you can do it, your kids need you, you've got to do it, you've got. It's so, so hard to see a woman on the phone, these wretched phones that cost them all of their commissary money, and she's just in the middle of singing a song with her baby to, stay in touch. And all of a sudden, this call is from a federal prison. This phone call will be monitored. You have, and then click, you have no time.
What's the title of your book that you wrote after
I
the,
called it Other Lands Have Dreams.
right? Is it still available?
From Baghdad to Pekin Prison. You can get it used, I think, online. I can't even find a copy right now at home, but
That's an excellent book.
some people use it with their classes, and so the students right away when the class is over take all their books to the secondhand store, which is exactly what I used to do too.
Sure.
So you can get it online.
Great.
Kathy Kelly, thank you so much for joining us. Good luck in your work with Voices for Creative Nonviolence, and carry on, sister.
We can't say enough.
Thank
So
you. I'm
important.
always
Right on.
so happy to see each of you, and also
We love
so
you.
happy to be with Diamond and Andrew this morning. And don't let that rain get you down.
Speaking of the rain,
We got a
have
lot of windows
we
with
have
rain.
we have a climate change type rain going on in Chicago right now. We no longer get the soft rain, we just get deluge.
We're listening live from the Heartland on WLUW 88.7 FM. Please check us out on youtube.com/heartlandmedia.